this is Chipicon, and welcome to Otherworldly. We are a show where we talk about anything spooky foo, interesting of that sort. And tonight, I have Sara Mastros, who is one of the Changing Times, Changing Worlds speakers and has been on here before. And I will put links to some of her other wonderful shows on making incense, political sorcery, Orphic hymns, ancestor works. She does everything. And tonight she's here to talk about offerings, which is topical to right now. We have just passed solstice at Yule, and if you bye, where I actually forgot to put out the porridge for our housewife, and the next day the big gallon glass jar that we keep our oatmeal in fell over and broke in the cabinet. Of course, yes, I know. And basically the next day I know why that happened. That wasn't simple, normal things. That was, but at least it wasn't a dead cow. And in case any of you have not heard that story, there is a story about a Nissa or Tomta who was expecting his annual offering of porridge with a big blob of butter in it. And because the housewife thought it would be a good idea to keep it warm while she carried it out to the barn, she put the porridge on top of the butter. And so when she left it there and he went to pick it up, there was no butter, and he was horrified and got very angry and killed the cow and went back and angrily started eating it, discovered the butter was in there. So in the morning, when the farmer went out to his barn, he discovered his neighbor's cow, because after he had killed the cow, he couldn't bring the cow back to life, so he traded the dead cow for his neighbor's cow. And so oh, you did give me butter. Here, okay, here's a cow. No, it's still my neighbor's cow. I have to give it back. So yes, I have housewives. I have had housewives fill water buckets for me, sweep, keep the path raked. I have housewives who have been very good to me, and I'm quite ashamed that I forgot to feed him this year. My personal thing is, people say, well, how do you know how to feed your housewives? And I said, well, just be regular. You can do it once at Christmas. You can do it every full moon or every dark moon, whatever. You can do it every week. You can do it daily. But you just have to keep doing it the way you're doing it, because if you break the pattern, they get cross with you. That's my personal 2 cents on offerings. But Sara has a wonderful article that's talking about all kinds of offerings. And do you want to talk about all kinds of offerings, or just the hospitality offerings, or what?
We talk about just offerings, and I didn't like write a lesson. I'm just going to talk. Please, good. Anyone feel free to interrupt me with questions at any point. Before I sort of get into it, I want to talk a little bit about like my background vis-a-vis offerings. So for me, like my understanding of offerings is largely rooted in like the way offerings are described in Torah, right? And also the way offerings are described in Greek mythology. Like those are the stories about offerings I came up with. And so like most of my thinking about offerings kind of is in that category, right? And then also like most people, like I came up with like fairy tales, right? And for me, the way I heard them as a kid, they had sort of been scrubbed of that kind of content. But once I started to like dig in a little further, right, there's this like Western European offering tradition as well. But again, my personal offering practice is largely not rooted in that Western European practice. It's really rooted in a practice growing out of like the Levant, right? What we would call like the Eastern Mediterranean. So both Greece and Israel, right? In like the Bronze Age through like late antiquity. Those are like the stories I came up on that had offerings in them. So most of my thinking is sort of informed by that, right? And so for me, you know, when I'm talking about offerings, let me preface this by one other thing. Sorry, I'm a little rambly. Again, I didn't prepare anything. And I'm just gonna, I said this earlier, but before we were recording, I just want to let everybody at home know I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm maybe like not 100% on my A game. Also, I can't see the chat window, so I'm just going to ask if there are questions for me in the chat window. Just let me know. So for me, I'm going to talk about offerings in categories, but I want to be clear that like the only reason I'm categorizing them is in order to talk about them, right? It's not that I think there are like really firm lines between these categories. I just need some kind of structure because otherwise I'll talk around in circles for a long time, right? So broadly, the categories I think about when I think about offerings are sin offerings, right? I have done something wrong and I'm apologizing, and I'm also giving you cookies when I apologize, right? The next kind is like payment. And I actually think like barter offerings, which are not really an offering at all. Like there's a pact, right? I give you this, you give me that. Like it's not really an offering, right? And then I think of like maintenance offerings, right? Which are like, I think the kind Chipican was talking about, right? Where you have like this sort of ongoing debt, right? Where you are honestly like, there's a blending between like a payment offering and a maintenance offering. But honestly, I think it is easy to get yourself into a situation where you are basically being extorted for offerings. So like I will say, if my housewives had knocked a jar over, I would have punished them for that. Like, like this is my house. Like, no, I cannot be extorted in that way. Like, I don't owe you that offering. You've misunderstood the nature of this relationship. Now, that being said, like I'm exaggerating. I wouldn't. In the case where you were talking about, right, where you like missed a big offering. This wasn't like you didn't feed them one day, right? This was like your yearly thing, right? Then I would actually have made a sin offering, right? I would have made an extra nice, like maybe I would have baked them a cake or something. I don't know, right? Like, right? I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm just characterizing that. I'm trying to explain how these categories, like actually in practice, greatly overlap with each other, right? But I do think that for beginners, right? So I am not putting you in this category, but I know for beginners, I think sometimes they get a lot of advice like, oh, were the fairies acting up? Give them an offering. Like, no. You don't give your dog a treat because it's misbehaving. That's just training them to extort things from you, right? So I do think like there is a problem with the way in our community we teach noobs about making maintenance offerings, right? So I'm actually going to talk about maintenance offerings last because I actually think they're like the most complicated category. So for me, sin offerings are like the most straightforward kind, right? I did something wrong, like, and I am like making an offering to atone for that wrongness, right? And I know words like sin are really loaded in our culture, especially for people who grew up Christian. I'm going to remind people that like I didn't grow up with that understanding of it. Like sin is, it's pretty straightforward in Judaism. There's two categories. I can wrong another human being and God cannot forgive me for that. That person has to forgive me for that. Or like there's a category of doing wrong against God, which is more like ritual mistake, right? Like those are not like ethical sins are sins against other people, right? But there's another kind that are sins against the divine, which is what I'm talking about in this category, right? That is about like you are just out of right relationship in like there's like a ritual way you're supposed to, it's like an etiquette rule that you have broken, right? And that's what I'm really talking about when I talk about a sin offering, right? So I am sometimes going to talk about making an offering for an actual like genuine misdeed. Like I did something wrong. Maybe, again, I know we're not like, I know pagans don't like to talk about things like sin, but I mean, I guess I can't speak for other people. Sometimes I do things that I knew were wrong when I did them. I'm ashamed of having done them. Like, it was a bad choice. I should not have done that. It was bad, wrong, shameful, sinful behavior. And like, I would like to not carry that around forever. So you make restitution to the human being, but sometimes you also, like, when I say sins of people against people, God can't forgive you for, in that context, when I say God, I mean like big, ineffable one. I don't mean like a God that has a personality. That I would put in the person category. So like, if I wrong Poseidon, I'm going to have to get Poseidon to forgive me for that. Right. And I'm going to do that by like apologizing, trying to make right whatever I have made wrong. And then additionally, just setting it right isn't enough, right? I'm going to make an additional sin offering, right? So for Poseidon, I don't live near the ocean anymore, but when I did, a sin offering for Poseidon would include both. Like, I'd probably go to the beach and pick up some trash. I might donate some money to like an ocean related charity, but I might also throw some eel sushi directly into the water, right? Sin offering, right? The particular beach where I lived, eel sushi was what that water spirit wanted. I learned after experience. Like, that was about that particular ocean spirit, like to eel sushi. I used to live very close to the Long Island Sound, like a couple blocks away. So I had a real like strong relationship with that spirit. So sin offerings, again, I think, you know, the most important component is the apology and restitution. And then it's also just like with a person, right? Like, if I'm accidentally mean to my roommate, maybe I'm gonna bring them a box full of fried chicken or something. You know what I mean? Like, here, I tried to make your life better. I personally believe fried chicken makes everything in life better, is why. Right? So sin offerings very straightforward, right? They're honestly pretty transactional. There's a lot of sort of detailed mythology about kind of like how they work, right? So I don't feel a need to like beat that home. I think most people kind of understand that concept, right? And again, like, in all of these categories of offerings, but also more broadly, like the way I'm going to approach dealing with not human spirits is always going to be modeled on how I would deal with it with human spirits, right? So like, I'm going to make sin offerings to non-human spirits in the same sort of situations that I would with humans. Like, I accidentally, or maybe intentionally, but I try pretty hard not to intentionally wrong other people, right? But if I do, I'm going to apologize, make it right, and like give a present, right? I personally believe that the more dense, which I mean sort of in the opposite of like the way we would say some spirits or bodies are subtle, right? Like, the more physical, right, the spirit is, the more inclined I am to make a very physical embodied offering, right? So like I was saying for Poseidon is like a giant spirit, right? Poseidon is not really even in, like, where I live, I have no relationship to the body of water that is Poseidon. None. Right? Like, I don't even live near the Atlantic Ocean, but Poseidon is not the Atlantic Ocean. Like, he's the Mediterranean. Right? So like, I can't give a physical offering there, right? But for a big spirit like that, right, an ascended spirit, I guess some people would say, like, I don't feel the need for like a physical one. I'd lean a little more into like charitable offerings, right? Whereas for much denser spirits, like say ancestors or house spirits or other like sort of small, localized, like denser spirits, those I really do think that like it's not the thought that counts. Like, actually you need some like physical stuff, like calories to the offering, right? So when I'm making sin offerings to them, I'll definitely lean more into like food and candles, right? But the irreplaceable core of any kind of offering is attention, right? Like, if you're just going through the motions of like making an offering, like, it barely counts, right? Like, it is like, you do have to actually pay attention to the spirit to whom you are attending, right? To kind of increase that oomph, to bridge that gap between, I guess I would say, like our world and theirs, though I'm not a big fan of that language It's all one weird world. We just only have sensory access to some of it, right? So we have these sin offerings. The next kind of offering I think of as just payment or barter, right? And that's a situation where like I've made a pact with a spirit, like you do this, I will do this. And usually, at least the way I write pacts, there's two offerings, right? There's kind of an initial like prime the pump offering, like you offer him a little taste. And then there's like, when you do this thing for me, you will get blah, 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 right? So when I'm deciding what to offer to a spirit, right, I'm going to lean on knowledge about broad categories of spirits, right? But if I happen to know more about that particular spirit, I'm going to try and pick something they like, right? So how do you know what a spirit likes? One place to learn that is from mythology and folklore about that spirit in particular. In my opinion, that is like maybe the least reliable of the sources I'm going to talk about, because it's, at least for those of us who, at least where I live, like that information is millennia out of date. And it's like not only is it the wrong continent, it's the wrong ecosystem, it's the wrong climate. Like it's just not super relevant to like the actual practice that is happening where I am, right? That's a little different, right? It depends on when the mythology and who the spirit is, right? The next source, which is my preferred source, right, is from other people I know who already have an established relationship with that spirit. Assuming I don't, like if I already have a relationship with the spirit, then like I'm going to rely on like direct mediumship communication from the spirit to find out, right? But I, at least, like my mediumship skills are not always up to doing that with spirits I like have not met before, right? So, right, for me, the most reliable source of information about what a spirit likes, other than the spirit themselves, is other humans that have a direct ongoing relationship with that spirit and who do live in a similar place and time that I live, right? Like I would rather get advice from somebody who lives a mile away from me about what a spirit wants than someone who lives 2,000 years and a continent away, personally, right? But I'm always going to look at all the sources, right, and try and put them together to find out what a spirit likes.
Somebody had asked me when you are moving, and I said, well, you always ask the house spirit, does it want to come with your family, or does it want to stay with the property?
Agree.
And if it is going to stay with the property, then telling that person what type of offering and how frequently is a really good idea. So
I agree, although I mean, my experience is most people are not really open to hearing that. But yes, I totally, like, when I have moved out of places, I have left letters for the next resident, which I assume the landlord threw out before the next resident saw them. Right. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, yeah. On that.
Good reason to mail it.
Say that again?
I said it's a good reason to mail it.
Oh, that's true.
But
that's true.
Anyway.
I wish I thought of that. Well, hopefully I'm not moving for a long time and it won't come up.
Yeah. But yeah. So we often get asked, what do you do to keep your land spirits and house spirits happy? It's like, they like you to be clean it up.
I mean, my experience, it's exactly the same things you do to keep other like human roommates happy. Is just like, I don't know, like all the things that keep roommates happy, right? Like,
listen,
feed them, listen, don't be a disgusting slob. That's the one I usually fail at. I think I can actually say with confidence, like, I'm an excellent housemate, except that I'm not like frat boy slob. I'm like absent-minded professor, piles of papers slob, not like decaying organic filth slob.
Yeah.
Okay.
Knee deep in beer cans.
Say that again?
Knee deep in beer cans.
Not quite, you know.
Okay, so we did have a question in the chat. Knowing who the offering is for, acknowledging who they are when you present it, and call them by name if you know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like a good description.
Agree. And I think that's part of what I was saying before about like really attending, like putting your attention on what you are doing and like on the fact that on the other end of this ritual is a person.
Yeah.
Right? Like not a thing, a person, not a force.
I think
not
a crafts person is not going to attract a house spirit who isn't into crafts, and they will get the mess that crafts create.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I guess I feel like with house spirits the same way I feel about it with human roommates. Like, I'm an excellent roommate in every other way. I pay more than my fair share of bills. I do all the cooking. If you want it cleaner, you can clean. Like, if the house elves want it clean, they can clean it. I won't object, you know?
Mine do until I get to a certain level. And then they say, oh, screw it. I'm knocking that over.
Honestly, I have a lot of housemates. So I honestly wouldn't know if the house, like if house spirits were cleaning up, I wouldn't know. I would assume it was my roommates.
Yeah. Well, pixies. They're just perverse. Okay, backing to offerings. Sorry.
Right. So we have these payment offerings as the next one. For me, I would always be very explicit about that, like written pact kind of explicit, right? I'll prime the pump. I'm just making a gift, like, oh, here's a little taste, right? But I'm very clear about sort of what they get and what the conditions are for how they get it, right? And it goes the other way too, of course, right? That like the expectations of what I have to do are also very clear and I am bound to meet my obligations, right? Or I don't get what I want, right? So the big category of offerings I want to talk about today, right, is what I would call hospitality offerings, right? And those are things that I am just giving. There is no expectation of reward. They're not like, I didn't do anything wrong. They didn't do anything good. I just am hospitable, right? So like, I'm just making an offering because they are hungry, basically, right? So I work those in a couple of different ways, right? Sometimes I do them as just a direct energy offering. This is extremely not a practice I would recommend to beginners. Like, I do not recommend that you, as like a qigong, like just hang there and let things eat you for as long as you can. Not a beginner practice. I do very much recommend it to more advanced practitioners, right? I think like it's a real danger room kind of a practice that like builds skill and power quickly, right? But again, it's a little dangerous. I don't necessarily recommend it, right? That being said, I've been mildly injured by that practice a few times, but less than any other kind of working out I do. Like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you get a little hurt. That's okay. Right? But I also have a sort of like ongoing physically grounded practice, right? Where I am not offering energy directly out of my body, right? I am offering like food and energy on a plate, right? So I have a particular practice called the wet egg, right? That is sort of the way I do it, right? This practice has changed a lot over the years. In particular, for me, the thing that changes it the most is who I'm living with, right? Because it is really a practice that whether they want it to or not involves everyone in the house. So like I kind of have to get roommate sign off on it, right? So this practice is actually rooted in like a thing I read in a book. So in the book, this woman, she was from Canaan, like ancient Canaan, and she was in Egypt, but she didn't speak Egyptian. She was pregnant and scared, and like she didn't know anybody or any of the Egyptian gods. And like she was introduced to Isis, right? A statue of Isis. And she would make offerings to Isis and ask Isis to just distribute them to all the gods of Egypt that she didn't know, right? And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. Like that's a good way to do that, right? So that story was like the root of my wet egg practice, right? So my wet egg practice generally, the way I do it now, but it's a very adaptable practice, right? What you need is a dish of some kind, an egg, like a raw egg, and some shiny doodahs, right? Beads and coins and like, I don't know, things you think are cool. They need to be like relatively physically small, shiny rocks, all kinds of stuff, right? And here's the way the practice works. You need a god to administer it. You need a big spirit to administer it for a while, right? But over time, like it will, the altar space that we are building will develop its own spirit over time. But at least the way I do it, you start off with a name spirit. So what you need in this spirit that you're going to call on is you need them to have a mythology about how they know the name of every other god or every other spirit, right? Like that is the category of god that you are looking for this practice, right? So for me, that's Hermes, but there are many, many, many other options, including Isis, right? That's an important part of Isis's lore, that she knows the names of their gods, right? There's like a story about how she tricked Ra's name out of him, for example, right? So and what you're going to do is you're going to start off by making an offering to them, right? And it's a payment offering. You're making a pact with them, right? Then in addition, basically in exchange for a cut of the offerings you are making, they will distribute these offerings for you to everyone, right? Like this is a practice where you are feeding everyone, right? It's like giving food to a food bank, right? Like it's an offerings food bank that you are running, right? No rules about who can eat, right? That is not to say, right, that like it's in your house. So they still have to get into your house and like obey whatever rules those are. So personally, right, I generally am more inclined to favor like a bouncer spirit than a ward, right? So I really won't keep anything out until it misbehaves, right? Like as long as it plays well with others, it's welcome. That's not entirely true. There's like a list of specific spirits who are not welcome, right? But there's a reason they're on that list. Like I blacklisted them based on their behavior, right? So, but you're just going to feed anybody who shows up, right? So the way I construct it is you have a dish, right? And an egg. That's really the core of the offering. Now, before you start, right, you want to have kind of like a whole bowl of, like I said, like miscellaneous tokens, right? I wish I had prepared better. So I'm just going to like look around my desk for the sort of things I mean. So here is like
Sarah,
uh-huh.
I am putting on the link to the to the article that you show your cute.
There's a blog post. I think there's also a YouTube video about this where you can see
the empty plate. And so if they want to see the empty plate and stuff, there will be images there. So
exactly. But I mean, I thought it is any kind of plate or whatever. Like I actually have a fancy Papa Legba plate that I like. After a while of having done this practice, I upgraded to a plate with Papa Legba's Veve on it that I had been given as a gift. I will say I didn't do this on purpose. But as my wet egg practice evolved, I will tell you almost everything that I give to that plate is actually regifted. Like it was given to me as a gift. And I didn't do that on purpose. And like, I didn't even realize it until like for years until I think it's when I wrote that article and I started like making a list of what was on that plate. So most of the things, like most of the little tokens that I'm offering generally came to me as gifts, although that is partly because I don't buy little tchotchke things because I feel like I'm not in short supply of like little random tchotchke nonsense. So I like the only way they make it into my life is as a gift. I don't actually want them, right? So just looking around my desk, here's what I mean about I'm drowning them. So here is a little metal tiger it's actually from a board game, right? That board game also had goats, little metal goats. It had 2 metal tigers. It didn't come with any instructions. I got it at a yard sale and it was just the board and all the tokens, which I bought to use as magical tokens. I've never played the game. But there were 2 of these metal tigers and then I think 30 little metal goats. Those metal goats are like highly prized offerings in my practice. Like you got to do a lot to earn a goat. Like a goat's worth a lot, right? Coins, especially foreign coins. I really like to offer foreign coins because I feel like they're I don't know, weird and special. They have like a liminality about them, right? And generally when I'm making token offerings, right, that's kind of what I'm looking for, right? So I have a bunch of tokens. Here's a little plastic frog. Here's a bead shaped like a skull and it's sparkly. I'm sure these things are too little for you to see. Again, this is just like random stuff that's on my desk, right? So you want like a whole bowl of like that kind of thing, like random little toys and tokens and whatevers, right? You definitely want some cash, right? And you definitely want some foodstuffs that can be left laying out. So wrapped candies are nice. It's better though, you want the kind that are like vacuum sealed into their packaging, not the kind that are just twisted in. We're going to pour alcohol over this thing is why like you don't want the if you pour alcohol over like a mint that's just in one of the twisty kinds of wrappers, it will dissolve and make a sticky mess. I have learned from experience, right? So you want the kind of candies that are like pre-wrapped. Cigarettes are great in there. Little physical offerings, right? Incense, I will sometimes like sprinkle some marijuana on, right? And alcohol. I actually don't drink. The only reason there's alcohol in my house is for spirits or because it's left over from a party, right? So I don't like get fussy about what kind of alcohol it is. But if you're into alcohol, you should get fussy about it. Like it should be good. Like I would never offer low quality weed, a thing I care about, but I don't know from alcohol. So it's just whatever alcohol happens to be in the house is usually whatever somebody left after a party, right? So you're going to put out the egg, right? And on the egg with a Sharpie marker, you're going to write, please distribute these offerings to all, or something like that, right? You can put a name on it. I don't, because there's like really a limited amount of space to write things on an egg. So you got to be pretty economical with your words, right? Take a Sharpie marker, write on the egg. I prefer white eggs for this personally, but that's just like an aesthetic decision, right? Put the egg in the middle of the bowl, right? And then like arrange tokens around it. And as you offer every token, it's a token, right? So like when I offer the tiger, I'm going to say what I am actually offering, right? So with this tiger, I offer my strength. That's a really bad offering, and I would never give my strength away like that. I don't know what I would offer with a tiger, right? But every single one, I'm going to like explain what it is, right? And I might just be like, this is a frog. I am offering you a live frog to devour, right? Like whatever it is, that's what I'm offering, right? And I don't have any sort of like system for what I do, like what tokens I use. Every time I refresh it, I just pick out different tokens based on like, I don't know, what seems right at the time. I've watched other people, like I've had other people set it at my house before, so I've seen people who have never done the practice do it. I really strongly encourage you to like, that thing I did where I was like, this is a tiger and I offer you my strength. It is really easy to fuck yourself up that way. Like I have had people end up seriously injured because they like offered their eye or something, and they did indeed take a pretty serious eye injury, even though I averted. Like I caught it and averted it. But I'm saying like, the thing about hospitality offerings is you are definitely making offerings to malicious spirits who are out to get. Like not all of them, but some of the things you're making offerings to are definitely demons. So like pay attention to what you are doing. Now the divine intermediary does make that easier, right? Like I want to think Hermes probably won't, he won't take my eye. Will he take somebody else's eye? Like, yeah, maybe. Like, probably. He has a reputation for that sort of thing, actually. Indeed, the sort of spirit that knows every spirit's name, that's not a kind, nurturing spirit. Like, that category of spirit tends to be a little trickstery. And if you're not on your A game, if you're sloppy with your words and sloppy with your intent, you can definitely offer things you didn't intend to offer, right? Because again, like it is not the intention that matters. Like the intention is important, but the actual words that come out of your actual mouth matter. right? So stay on your game, pay attention. And that means that this is a slow process. Resetting the egg takes, now that I do it a lot, I would say maybe half an hour, right? But for the first probably 2 or 3 years of this practice, it easily took an hour to do, right? So this is a practice that makes more sense as you do it more often. So I'm kind of gliding through this, but I keep talking about resetting. So this first setup is probably going to be bad. Like, don't worry about the first time you do it too much, because you're going to redo this over and over, right? So you're going to arrange the tokens, right? Arrange, and then I always include new cash, right? So like I take out the cash that was there and give new cash. For me, it's usually about maybe $4 or $5, right? Usually in change. One of the functions of the change and the tokens is you want to like build sort of a little nest so your egg will like stand up vertically, right? Like you're building a nest basically for your egg, right? Physically, I don't mean magically, I mean like physically arrange them so that your egg will remain vertical, right? When everything's out, you're just going to pour alcohol over the whole thing. That's why you need a dish underneath, like not a flat tray, right? You need something with like, you don't need a whole bowl, but you do need something enough that it'll hold some liquid at the bottom, right? And that is the practice. And you leave it there, right? You reset it every week, I think is good. When you're establishing this practice, I do think it's good to reset it every week, right? Once you've got like a sort of ongoing practice once a month, even less, you could do once a season. I think that's maybe about as far as I would stretch it, right? Okay, so now we're gonna talk about resetting. It's already there, right? Maybe let me talk about, before I get to resetting, I'm gonna talk about what to do with it while it's there, right? So you wanna put it somewhere that it's like in your house and like getting attention, regular attention, right? So like when I cook, I sometimes offer it little tidbits. I talk to it. When I come home, I don't have pets, but I would, my instinct would be is that if you have animals roaming your house, a thing I don't understand why a human being would do. I feel like the entire point of having a house is that I don't have animals roaming around it. I would get one of those clear cake dome things and put it in that. And I think that would probably solve the problem. Like, I don't have cats, but I wouldn't think a cat would knock that over. They seem pretty solid, right? So I think that would probably be fine. That's what I would do. Right, but you do want it somewhere that like you are interacting with it, right? And if that's not viable, then I would honestly scratch the whole practice and develop a practice that does work in your particular situation, right? Because like a core element of this practice is that this is like it does actually have to be open. Like I am also offering that to the mice, right? I think a cake dome probably okay, but truthfully, I would not put a dome over it, right? Like I do think you're maybe going to need to magically adjust this practice if you need to keep it sealed, right? Because that's like antithetical to the nature of the practice, right? That is like actually your cat needs to be welcome to eat from it, or else not everything is welcome to eat from it, right? So I would just think about like I would think about the logistics of your own practice, but what I'm saying is the core essence of a hospitality offering, the way that I am teaching it, like the core essence of this wet egg practice is it does have to be open to any spirit that wants to eat from. So like if you can't do that in your location, like you might need to adjust the practice more dramatically than just putting a dome over it, I guess is what I'm saying. Like I don't know that it'll work with a dome over it, right? But it might. I mean, give it a shot. I'm sure you can adjust it so that it will, right? So, right, you're going to continually interact with it. When I come home, I greet it. I'm like, hey, egg, thank you for keeping the house safe while I was gone. I had the most terrible day. Let me pour you a shot and we'll talk about it, right? Or like, oh, egg, I had such a great day. Have a cookie, right? I have never had offered food spoil. In my opinion, if offerings are going bad, you're doing it wrong. Like that is a sign that there is something wrong with your offering practice. That being said, right, like if you live somewhere that's really like humid, I can imagine that maybe would be a problem. For me, like offerings dry out before they can't spoil because they like completely desiccate in a way that food left elsewhere doesn't do. Like there is a visible, if you want to know if your offering practice is working, make 2 plates, offer one and just leave the other one on the counter. And if they are like, if there is not an observable physical difference in the way those things decay, I actually think like you're doing it wrong. Like you should be able to see the difference. But this wet egg practice, what I'm saying is it takes time to like build up, right? So I would not necessarily, and I might anticipate more spoilage earlier in the process, which is why I told you to reset it more often earlier in the process, right? Right, so you're going to interact with it. I just talk to it. I just call it egg, but I guess you could like, it could have another name, but it's not really like, it is not a servitor, right? Like I talk to the egg, but I don't think of the egg itself really as a like singular person much, right? Like there's kind of a blurry area, right? But it's really like a machine that I have constructed that performs this function of distributing offerings, right? And there is an intelligence overseeing it, but that intelligence for me is Hermes. It's not the egg itself. Now it's actually Papa Legba because I have a Papa Legba plant, but it used to be Hermes. And actually, I'm not using the Papa Legba plant that's in the photos. Like those photos are many years out of date. It looks totally different now. Again, sorry, I didn't prepare a slideshow, right? So when you reset it, right, you want to crack the egg down the drain, right? Or directly into compost, right? You should find that the egg has not gone bad. It's gone hollow, right? So when you crack it, it shouldn't smell bad. It should have like dried out inside. So there's like a hard little gummy ball inside. That is my general experience. But you know, it depends how long you leave it out, right? If you don't leave it out long enough, I assume it doesn't have a chance to do that. Again, if you want some like confirmation that it is working, if you pick up a fresh egg and one that has been offered, you should be able to feel the difference. The offered one should be dramatically lighter. Now, I imagine that might happen with any egg you leave out to desiccate. All of this is predicated on the fact that I'm using American eggs. I will say I learned that in Europe, they don't refrigerate eggs. They have like a natural coating on them that makes them shelf stable that apparently we just wash off before we're allowed to have eggs in the US. That's a thing I learned at my sister-in-law's house when I was like, are you aware that there are eggs in your pantry? But apparently in the rest of the world where their food is not industrialized poison, that's like, so what I'm saying is if your eggs have that coating on them, this process I am talking about, where like, what I'm talking about is the water is evaporating out through the shell. I don't know if they'll do that like with natural eggs or not. I have never experimented with them as I don't really have a way to get them. But like I live in the city. It's not that easy to get fresh eggs here. Right. Okay. So that's sort of a wet egg practice, right? It should be wet. Right. So when the alcohol is fully, you should be giving it alcohol enough that it is wet. Like there should be standing alcohol in the bottom of that dish. Where I live, except in the summertime, that's like every maybe 3 days. But I think it depends on the shape of your dish and the temperature of your house. Are there any questions about what I have said before? Anything I've said so far?
My first thought is that the 2 biggest recipients of offerings in our house are Thor and Ganesh. And Ganesh gets mostly sweets and Thor gets mostly alcohol. And
my experience of Ganesh is that he likes bananas.
He likes cookies. He likes all kinds of sweets.
Oh, you know, people tell me there's apparently some kind of cookie that has peanut butter in it that is shaped like, I'm allergic to peanuts, so I don't have a lot of experience with peanut candy.
Probably
Kind of peanut cookie
Nutter
that
butter cookies.
yes, I think that's it. Apparently, I am told Ganesh loves fucking Nutter Butters, but I'm allergic to peanuts.
I've created a Ganesh's treats, which is like a snickerdoodle, but it also has saffron in and is
Oh la
rolled
la!
in,
Like you
and
make
is
those?
rolled in sesame seeds, and he's very fond of those.
I
But
would love to see a
Thor,
recipe for
you
that.
can give him a shot glass and put in an ounce or so of liquor, and the next morning it'll be down to nothing.
Yeah.
And this is in a cupboard,
Yeah.
so, which because we want to keep the cats out of them. And but we also have a theory that if you're baking, the first the nicest cookie in the first batch has to go to the kitchen goddess, because if you don't give her that, then you will lose at least one whole tray of cookies.
Well, that makes sense. I will say,
Yeah,
so for me, I rarely bake, but when I do, I always pull off a portion and just throw it directly on the fire for the Queen of Heaven.
Yeah, but anyway, so I'm not sure if I put an egg with booze in it, that Thor wouldn't, pick up the egg, drink the thought, and put it back.
I mean, if he does, then in my practice, you would simply need to put more alcohol in.
Yeah.
Like that. So, I'm running a food bank for anyone who's hungry, and I will stop. Like, I'm going to keep offering.
Talk a little bit about hospitality. How do you treat guests in your house?
And Griffin has a question when we have a chance.
Oh, right. Gumdrops. Yeah. Somebody said gumdrops.
I just had my hand up.
Who's got their hand up?
I did. It just keeps going away. Anyway, actually, before I forget, see if we can get these to show up. No,
I don't know what you're showing.
Okay.
Well, it's a box of Nutty Buddies, which is the peanut butter crackery thing that if I'm going to do that, I'm going to keep more around. My favorite snack too, but I don't know if you want to cover it now or whether you can get to it later on in the talk. But after you talked about house whites and all of that, I looked at it as the kind of dull, practical person who needs help with housework. And having promised Mother Hull that I would do a better job of it, I'm still struggling to keep up with all I have to do. So how could I go about attracting helpful spirits that I could then reward by feeding them and work up a relationship that way? Or is that even the right way to do it?
Well, let me answer, but then I'm going to pass it over to Chipicon, because I will say I have never successfully gotten a non-human spirit to do housework for me. Right. But what I would say is, right, I would buy, really, like in a very transactional way, I would buy a familiar spirit off of a spirit with whom I had a relationship, right? So like for me, maybe Hestia, right? I would compact with Hestia. Like I would enter into conversation with Hestia and find out what she wants in exchange for making that happen.
Okay.
Right. And then I would write a compact for it. But I will say historically, when I have done that sort of thing, what I end up with is somebody who wants to pay reduced rent in exchange for doing extra housework. And I'm very happy with that arrangement. Like that's how I would expect that compact to play out in my life.
Well, yeah.
A roommate, in other words.
With a human.
Yeah. And I'm so new to the whole concept. I'm still exploring what I can and cannot expect to be able to do. And, I have figured out that I have magic. I'm a kitchen witch and a techno mage. And I'm trying to explore all of this because I'll be honest and say I'll take all the help I can get. And if I can trade cookies for housework or something like that, I'm going to go out and buy cookies. So that's really what I just want, like a primer on how to do this.
I think generally, right, like I would think of this as exactly the same as any other kind of compacting magic, where I am making a bargain with a spirit, right? That being said, look, here's the thing. I am not, as I said, like I have now lived in this house for 7 years, and that is twice as long as I have ever lived in one place before. So like, I don't have a like very strong like house spirit practice because I am a creature of the crossroads by nature, right? So I'm going to throw it over to Chippekan. That being said, I think it would be cheaper to pay a human to do housework than it would be to pay a spirit to do it. Would be my general experience.
Well, I suppose if we could work an arrangement like roommate for reduced rent for doing housework is not practical for us. We can't afford to pay even the least expensive people around here who can do housework. So I'm forced to put out to the spirit realm,
right,
looking for help. And I see Chippekan's comment about checking with Asclepius. Actually, I'm in the process now of finding out if I have finally successfully guessed at an invisible illness I've had for most of my life, which my doctors are now working on, and which will give me more energy.
Oh, good.
But in the meantime, yes. In the meantime, I'm just wondering, I really just, it's like I walk into this giant store that offers everything, and I don't even know which department to look in for what I want.
Well,
so that's why I just keep pestering people who know anything about anything.
I think, from my opinion, the first thing to do, right, is to enter into compact with a spirit. Then what you are bargaining for is their help becoming better at magic, right?
Okay.
I would, right? And I would expect to pay for that in the ways that we always pay for learning, right?
Yeah.
That is to say, learning is just hard and you got to do some work to do it, right? What I was saying before, it would be cheaper to pay for it. I think it would be easier to do I think it's probably easier to get money than it is to get like an elf that sweeps your floor, personally. Like I would, if I did magic to like get help from spirits with housework, I would expect that help to come in the form of cash, is really what I'm saying.
Right.
Which I think is like the easiest way for that to occur.
And that's good, because that's all good answers, because it gives me a better sense of what is and is not practical. And
it might be super practical. I mean, Chippekan says that her spirits sweep. Like that's dope.
Okay, I
don't know how to do that, but I haven't lived anywhere long enough.
I'm going to save that for a conversation with Chippekan, unless she wants to add it to tonight's presentation.
Well, I'm just going to say that while I have had them do this, I have never done it at request. It's always been volunteered. It's always been, you walk out there and the circle has already been raked.
Yeah. Yes, I've definitely had that.
Repairs have been made. The things, these things are essentially offerings they're giving you.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are not servitors. They are friends exchanging gifts.
Yeah.
It sounds like such a good relationship for so long. That there's give and take.
Historically, right? When we hear stories of like, the elf that cleans your kitchen, that elf's been in relationship with your family for like 8 generations.
Right.
And so like, I'm doing my best, but I like,
okay.
I'm going to real briefly actually touch on another category of like, this is a category of spirit, right? So I talked about ancestors. I think the place where you get the most bang for your buck in offerings is ancestors, right? Which are deeply dependent on you for offerings, right? They're very dense. They're still like, those are not ascended gods. You know what I mean? Like they were very recently humans. They were very recently embodied. They're hungry and cold, right? And also they are like invested in your success for the most part, because what else do they have to be invested in? Like you're their legacy. But another category of spirits close to the ancestors that I recommend making direct offerings to is landcestors, right? Which is sort of the spirit of every human who has lived and died on the land where you now live, right? So where I live, that's actually for the Americas, a very long history. I live quite near the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, one of the oldest signs of human habitation in North America. But I also live on a battlefield from the French and Indian War. So like I have quite a lot of ancestors where I live, depending where you live, and like it's going to really depend like how active your ancestors are and how many of them are from like what period of history, right? But ancestors are another spirit where I think you get like a lot of bang for your buck in terms of offering, because they're quite human. So when they are making, like we were saying, like friendship gifts, like they maybe know what humans want, you know what I mean? And they're like hungry for physicality, right? So for me, I almost all offerings I make, the wet egg is actually an exception. Almost all offerings I make have a fire component, like a candle, and a water component, which I think lubricate the transmission from one world to another. That whole sentence was in scare quotes because every single word of that is like technically incorrect. It's all one world. We're not lubricating, but you know what I mean? It just like greases the wheels a little bit. I think fire and water in particular. I also like incense, but that's mostly because I wrote a book about incense. So I just am into incense.
Yeah. And as I put up earlier, there's a whole Sara Mastros thing on ancestors. So cool.
Yeah, there's one on ancestors. I think I talked about ancestors in there too, but I don't quite remember. Do you remember if I did?
I do not remember it. It's hard to catch that word when you haven't heard it before.
Yes,
so.
I'm pretty sure I invented that word, but I'm trying to get it to catch on. So,
but I understand the logic now. So when you explained it this time, I was like, so that's what she's talking about.
Yes. Yeah. So ancestors, any spirit who has lived and died, like, but it's a very closely localized, like it's like within sight of the exact space where you are.
Well, it's a wonderful word. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah.
Because we live in a spot now that is pretty old by American history standards, and the native peoples were here before the whites were, so it could be a bunch of ancestors. So
I mean, most of North America has at least 15,000 years of human habitation.
Yeah.
I happen to live really near a river confluence. So like I live on a very strategically valuable piece of land. So people live here. Like this hasn't been wilderness. Like this has been managed land for 15,000 years. Like I live.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it's time for me to call for, are there any other questions? Angela, Thor, Elizabeth, Henry, do you have questions for Sara? Because we're going to have to do our goodbyes soon. And
I'm sure we barely scratched the surface.
Well, you seem to have. Yeah, I love. Do look at the. If you save the chat, and then you can go to the check out the various links I put up, and it's you can see the picture of her Papa Legba play in between uses. So you don't have to worry about the not having a slideshow. So yay.
Like I said, I've got a little bit of a cold.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you said it's not just intention, but it's also your words. If you
think it's like
in hospitality,
the actual thing that happened, and like your intention is barely relevant.
Hospitality is a really deep and heavy subject in traditional cultures.
I agree.
What you owe a guest and what the guest owes you is incredibly powerful.
Honestly, the way most Americans disregard hospitality, I think brings shame on them and their ancestors. Like I think it's genuine.
And probably bad luck given by the spirits who have been
I hope so,
slighted. So yes, you look more into hospitality, and
I agree.
hospitality offerings are
I totally agree. But I guess I'm just gonna push out there that like the most important spirits to be hospitable to are your neighbors, like your human neighbors who are
yes,
like, you know, like
yeah,
Yeah.
real normal person to person hospitality.
is it your highest as a human, your moral obligation to feed and house cold, hungry humans does outweigh your obligation to feed and house cold, hungry spirits. And if you're giving more to the dead than you are the food bank, I do think you should like investigate your
Adjust your perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, you talk about gifts, and I'd suddenly flash a line from a story I read a long time ago. It's essentially a female magician, a witch, was challenging this oppressive person and announced her demands. And the last line was, "and parting gifts worthy of our station." And that concept just sank in, that a departing gift gets something to show their value.
Absolutely.
And okay, on that note, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all our guests.